Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on Episode 1 of The Familiar of Zero, Rondo of Princesses. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So last we left off, the war was rather serious. Saito managed to hold off an attacking army, and in so doing, died. But he got a little bit better. Now, I can't help but wish that we had gotten a little bit of this at the end of the previous season, just because, perhaps in stereotypical fashion, Louise found reason to be upset at Saito, even after he came back to life and sought her out, and, it really isn't fair and all that, so, maybe if the guy you just wed came back to life rather unexpectedly, you could show a little gratitude, but I guess better late than never. Now that said, I'm sure circumstances will conspire to thwart any romance. I mean, of course Louise is a wee bit bashful, and who can blame her, but, boy, I've got a bad feeling that the plot's gonna intervene big time, and, man, I thought we would get maybe 10 seconds more, but I guess not. Siesta has to stick her oar in and cause a big problem. And I guess the worst part is that Saito has to proclaim his innocence here. That oh boy, I wasn't really doing anything, don't worry about it. Oh dear. So I guess this is the real plot then. The runes that mark Saito as a familiar are fading, which... boy, that's probably not a good thing. Now, normally during the opening theme, I would sit quietly with reverence, but today I am obligated to my sponsor. Today's sponsor is none other than myself. You may not know this, but I write light novels, and I've written quite a few. Today, I'm going to tell you about the eccentric detective Yamamoto, in which the intrepid, if drunken, detective solves a wide variety of cases with the help of her assistant Satoshi. Ranging from finding missing pets and surveilling cheating spouses to catching a high-end cat burglar and preventing the murder of a local business magnate, no case is too big or too small for Detective Yamamoto. Even when she's forced to work with, and occasionally against, the police, and even when she must contend with her fear of the supernatural, nothing will prevent the eccentric detective from doing what needs to be done to solve the case. If this sounds like something you'd like to read, then by all means, consider purchasing books in the Eccentric Detective Yamamoto series by me, Frederick Fitzgerald, through Amazon. Thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the episode. So I guess the salient question to think about first is, what's gonna happen to Saito? That little mark on his hand was not only the mark of him being a familiar, but the mark that made him out to be Gandalfer, which was a big, important thing we were led to believe. So I guess, what happens? Is it going to break the bonds between master and familiar? Will Saito cease to be able to understand anyone? And I guess, beyond that, will he even be able to fight anymore? Because, really, that's sort of the whole purpose of Gandalfer. The Void Mage takes a lot of time with their incantations, and therefore they need a more capable familiar to back him up. So, Saito can't do that. It's not exactly good, in the last season he had done some training to, be more capable on his own, but... something tells me that's really not gonna do him much good in the grand scheme of things. Now, I guess the nice thing is that Saito does have, a nice magic talking sword who's seen a lot to, ask questions to. Now, Derflinger isn't exactly helpful here, saying look, you're a free man at this point, but, is that really what you want, I feel like in a manner like this, freedom is overrated, If you have to choose between freedom and Louise, it's certainly a harder choice than Derflinger makes it out to be. Now that said, if Saito does have to deal with Louise's sisters as well as Louise, then, maybe freedom's a good thing after all. Oh dear. So Louise has let slip that Saito's runes have faded, and naturally it's going to be talk of the town. The Zero Louise can't even maintain her familiar, So that's a rough place to be. And I guess what's even worse than that is, Saito at least had some station as Louise's familiar, but without that, he's just a commoner through and through, so, there's probably no reason to have him around the campus, and more to the point, he'll probably have to get some sort of menial job. Now this is something. Eleanor here is saying, look, Louise, it's time for a vacation. And, oh, that's interesting. Eleanor's saying just summon a new familiar. I was given to believe that this was, expressly forbidden, like 10 Commandments tier forbidden. You really, really, really can't do that. But I guess Eleanor hates Saito so much that she's willing to, risk her little sister. So, I don't know. I guess the situation is quickly looking not all that great for Saito. Not too many people are happy to have him around, and I don't know, no one really knows what to do. Oh dear. So Agnes arrives with news and orders, but already her orders are sort of out of date, If she's ordering Louise and her familiar to the palace, well, bad news, Saito kinda really isn't that anymore. So, I guess what's worse is, if they are to embark on something dangerous, Saito might not be up to the task. Now, Saito's got, a bit of a hurdle here. Louise is being rather prickly, saying that, look, if you don't want to be around me, just leave. There's nothing that ties us together anymore. I should think now would be the appropriate time for a big, sloppy, reassuring kiss. Now, it might not go over well. In fact, it might go over like a lead balloon, but I think it would ultimately be the right thing to do, as opposed to what Saito's doing right now and engaging in verbal argument. Just because, when you feed into something like this, it's only going to cause more trouble. Insinuating that Louise is cold and uncaring about all this, when, really, from her perspective, she's sort of trying to, offer him freedom insofar as she can. I mean, that's not necessarily something that I think Saito particularly wants, but it's kind of neither here nor there at this point. Oh dear. So, we saw a neat little evil figure in the woods that, if I had to guess, would be Sheffield, and now, Louise and Saito are taking a break in a meadow by the woods. So, it sure seems to me this is going to be a demonstration of Saito's powerlessness without the runes, surely something's going to happen to Louise, and surely Saito will be incapable, if willing, to do something. Although he's also making the rookie mistake of allowing her to venture off into the forest alone and upset, which, that's never a good thing to be doing, because, I don't particularly get the feeling that Louise knows these woods like the back of her hand here. Man, it really seems like they're dancing around the topic of summoning a new familiar, because I thought Colbert-sensei made it very, very clear in the first episode that, no, you can't be doing that. You summon a familiar, that's your familiar. And I guess I was even kind of given to understand that if your familiar does pass away, then, that's it, you just have to lump it. But, well, maybe that's not entirely the case. Maybe it's, I don't know, kind of like divorce or something, or, the church allows it in certain instances. Okay, so what's all this then? Louise recognizes this small impish creature, but, I don't know, the creature seems to be, hostile? Alright, so there we go. I guess, Sheffield has bewitched Albie here. Yeah, okay. Very unfortunate for Louise, but Sheffield has her number that, like, look, I've got you surrounded. You can't chant a spell fast enough for me to, get you, so just, give in now. I guess the good thing is that Sheffield isn't here to kill Louise, but she is here to capture her, so, I don't know. Things certainly aren't good, and if Saito knows what's good for him, he's gonna show up post-haste and, give all these gargoyles the business. Or at least that's what they seem to be. I mean, really, if Saito knew what he was doing, he would probably, stab that Sheffield woman for good. Because, really, as bad as, what's-his-face was? The, Cromwell. That was his name. As bad as Cromwell was, Sheffield seems to be worse, if only because Cromwell was sort of summarily defeated. This isn't exactly the case for Sheffield. Yeah, it is sort of unfortunate for Louise that Sheffield has apparently done her research. That, look, I know what you're capable of, I know what your tendencies are, and I'm going to exploit them to the nth degree. It is interesting that Sheffield is leading with information. And I guess given that she also has runes on her forehead, then, Oh, that's very interesting. Alright, so Sheffield herself is a familiar. And, rather than being skilled with weapons as Saito is, she apparently has access to knowledge. So, I guess that does go some way to explaining things, but, it's interesting that there is, 1, another Void Mage, and 2, that this mage is seemingly at odds with Louise. Not that Louise is strictly like, an actor in her own right, like she's sort of subservient to the queen and all that. But, I don't know. It seems interesting because whatever we thought was going on, which is to say war between states, there is now something else going on that is, in my mind, more religious in nature. Whatever that name Sheffield called herself was, she also added the title The Mind of God, which, that's sort of presumptuous, but I guess, Void Mages and their familiars are sort of religiously significant. We'll probably figure out more about that as time goes on. Although thinking about it, Giulio, he was like a papal soldier or something. He was beholden mainly to the Pope in Romalia. Yeah, that wacky creature probably knows more than he let on initially. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case, because he certainly seemed to know some stuff about things, even if he wasn't exactly forthcoming. Alright, so this is kind of interesting here. The Void Mage in question is likely named Joseph, and he's telling his familiar to retreat, which, I get it, but there's a lot of real significant names here. With Cromwell and Sheffield, those are both names from English history, I suppose, and Joseph is a particularly interesting name in my mind. It springs St. Joseph to mind, especially in regards to religion and all that, which, oh dear. So, I get why Louise is having a bit of an outburst here, but at the same time, I really don't think it's fair to blame Saito when you wandered off angrily, and, I guess to her credit, she does thank him. It was no small risk on his part to just jump in and do things, but, man. So this is something, the queen has invited them to her room and she reveals that, to finance the war, she basically sold all of her personal possessions, and, that's a nice little thing, that's That's a considerable show of dedication. However, the princess seemingly brought Louise here just to apologize for everything. You know, I would have thought she had something in mind, like a mission or something that needs to be done, but, I guess not. Perhaps she's just sort of happy that Saito is still alive. Although, maybe she didn't know he died. Who knows, really, but I guess the real salient information is that she's knighted him. He's a chevalier now. So, well, that's a nifty little turn of events here. Because, sure, Saito doesn't know what this aristocratic title means, but it does make him an aristocrat, which therefore, I guess, sort of puts Louise on the map, as it were. Before he was a familiar, and there are certain allowances made for that, but now as an aristocrat, even though he sort of stubbornly refuses to take the title, he could, realistically, court Louise properly, and I suppose her family could say something about it, but not nearly as much as they could say now. Oh, okay. So Derflinger has some information here, like Saito having died has essentially voided the contract. So I feel like the obvious rejoinder to this is that if the contract was resolved, then the only way to sort of reignite the contract is to form a new one. And surely that could be done, right? But unfortunately, Derflinger is sort of more interested in telling everyone about the fairy that revived Saito and how, she might be able to do stuff. She has a magic ring that restores the dead to life. And I guess Queen Henrietta would be very interested in that, given Prince Wales is still deceased. Although, it's hard to say. I feel like reviving the dead is a really case-by-case thing, and you should really only do it when it's, like, a freshly deceased person, like, within an hour. If you start reviving, like, people have been dead for a while, like, who's to say they come back as they were? It's probably something better left alone. Not that Tifania the elf was engaging in any, necromancy per se, but probably better to just avoid the whole thing as a matter of course. Ah, dear. So I guess we can't escape a little bit more trouble. Louise is probably just having a nightmare, but in her nightmare, Saito leaves, which, I get why that's upsetting to her, despite her behavior leading up to now. And I guess, when she wakes up alone, like, it does seem to be that her dream has come true. And boy, something tells me Saito's about to step on a rake again. Because, like, I'm sure Louise isn't going to explain exactly what she's upset about, but at the same time, Saito's not going to make things any better. Yeah, unfortunately, he's a little too focused on being pragmatic where it's not going to help here. Saying, hey, Louise, standing out here in your sleepwear is going to catch you a cold. It's cold out here. But, that sort of misses the wider point that, she's not feeling too well. And, I don't know, a nice little hug could probably, fix everything. Now, this is sort of an interesting complaint from Louise, because on the one hand, he did sort of pull some subterfuge on her to get her on that ship, and he did die, and, he did sort of let her walk off into the woods here, but, I don't know, it seems to me that, the time is right for a little renewal of vows here. They don't necessarily need to do the same familiar vow, but, maybe on top of that, Saito could sweeten the deal, as it were. Vow never to leave her. Something like that. I mean, he's saying that, but I feel like suiting the action to the word would be a bit more reassuring, Oh dear. So Saito is displaying confusion, and I get why he's confused about this and why he's probably right to be confused, but at the same time, maybe he shouldn't voice his concerns that he won't be able to protect her out loud to her face, which, I get it, but at the same time, maybe it's better you don't. Alright, I'm wondering if I misread the subtitles in the first episode, because Louise is, concerned about trying the summon servant spell again, in case, if it happens, she summons something else, and that'll be bound to be her familiar. And I get her concerns, but I was really under the impression that you just couldn't do it at all, like it wasn't allowed. But more to the point, if she does get a new familiar, then that leaves Saito to be an aristocrat and, her retainer, I guess, for want of a better term. So, could it really be the worst thing in the world? Oh dear. So unfortunately, Saito can't help but make things just a little bit worse, bringing up that promise she made about, waiting till it's dark, but, maybe now's not the time. Surely you could do, like, a little bit of cuddling instead and, do other things later. Like, I get it, the impulse is a strong one, but maybe resist it for the sake of long-term prospects. Oh dear, indeed. And, when you push the issue too far, now you get nothing. So, it does kind of serve Saito right. Man, just like that, every little scrap of progress they made has reverted back to the status quo. Oh dear, indeed. Saito's been demoted from dog to water flea, so it's possibly more over than previously thought possible. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboys.